in our last lectures we have discussed that management is a multidisciplinary concept and we have to know about different disciplines as well as its functional areas, like the production system, like the information system, like the strategic management, and the applications of certain concepts in management. In today's lecture, I am discussing some of the concepts of management, in which I am going to make you familiarize with the concepts which are used in various management we can say areas, and which will also be part of the course that we are discussing. So, I begin with some concepts, not that this is the exhaustive list of all the concepts which are perhaps used in management, but some of the concepts which we are using very frequently and is in various areas of management. So, I will just take up one by one number of concepts, and sometimes you may feel that the list is a bit too long, but then you have to get acquainted with these concepts. So, and I have tried to mix these concepts of various functional areas and various disciplines of management to make you understand that what are the things we are discussing in management, or in other words I can say that I am trying to present some sort of a panorama of the management concepts, or some sort of a scenario I am trying to build for management concepts. So, let us move on. First, we are discussing the activity based management, and the concept activity based management. This uses detailed economic analysis of important business activities to improve strategic and operational decisions. It increases the accuracy of cost information by more precisely linking overhead and other indirect costs using bases such as direct labor hours, machine hours, or material costs. Then we talk about the competencies, as competencies are set of behavior usually learned by experience and are instrumental in accomplishment of various activities. Now we talk about diversification. Diversification makes good sense as better opportunities are found outside the present business. So, diversification strategies are used. So, that means there is a business and you want to make use of your potentials and your opportunities to diversify your business, and so number of ways one could do that. Let us see what are some of these ways. One is concentrating diversification strategies. We develop new products with the earlier technology for new segments, or we diversify developing new products for new market itself. We can also make use of diversification in the horizontal sense, using horizontal development strategies, where we develop new products with new technology and of course, for the old customers based on the customer based requirements. This brings us to one of the recent concepts we are using in the strategic management, that is the balanced scorecard. Balanced scorecard, this was designed by one of the professors, Harvard professors, Dr. Robert Kaplan and David Norton, in fact both of them. president of Reengineering Solutions, and this actually translates the mission and vision statements into a comprehensive set of objectives and performance measures that could be quantified and appraised. And these perhaps would include financial performance, the customer value performance, internal business process performance, innovation performance. So, all these types of performance that we have listed here are actually included in this. Then we come to benchmarking. We also make use of this term very often, in fact, in most of the areas, that how do we benchmark a particular performance or issue. So, in benchmarking, we are trying to discuss this as a process by which a company compares its efficiency and effectiveness on various parameters with that of another. In the same or different industry, we can say, even within the same industry also we can have the benchmarking. And so, benchmarking has become a very popular concept these days, and for any kind of a standard that we want to actually achieve, we have the concept of benchmarking. Benchmarking also implies continuous comparing and measuring an organization's business processes against the industry leaders to collect information that can help the company to improve its performance. Then we move on to business forecasting. When we are conducting any business, when we are having some business, we would certainly like that can we have any kind of a forecasting for our future planning. So, business forecasting is an integral part of the strategic planning, and various types of forecasts could be used depending upon the situations, and some of these are the economic forecasts, financial forecasts, the sales forecast, technological forecast, and of course, there are essentially 4 approaches. There could be many more, but essentially we are talking about some of the approaches which I am just trying to make you acquaint. These are the qualitative approach, where the forecast is based on judgment and opinion, and these include the expert opinion, Delphi technique. Maybe some of you would like to note down some of these points. So, I am going slightly slow, so that perhaps you could note down these points, or you could repeat viewing this. And Salesforce, then you have the consumer surveys, the techniques for eliciting expert opinion, and a PERT derived technique could also be there. So, this brings us to from this forecasting analysis to another aspect of forecasting, that is the quantitative analysis that we are doing. I am taking up forecasting in slightly more details than many other concepts, because we need actually do a lot in terms of forecasting in the management studies. So, so the quantitative approach, where forecasting is based on the historical data, which could be in any kind of a data. It could be time series analysis or many other kinds of data. It could be a native method, it could be the moving averages, it could be exponential smoothing, it could be trend analysis, or it could be decomposition of time series, Box-Jenkins, and many other methods of course could be used. These are some of the ones very commonly used by the we can say not only researchers, actually the functional people also in the organizations. Then we also have associative forecast, which includes some of these factors. There's simple regression. If you would recollect that in our earlier discussion, we have had a discussion on methodology, and where we were also talking about the possibility of having the various types of analysis, including the regression analysis and multivariate analysis. So, here the reference is to that. Then multiple regression analysis could be, simple analysis could be there, regression analysis, it could be multiple analysis, it could be any kind of econometrics indicators. And when we are looking at the issue of forecasting, this is also based on learned behavior, which we call the Marcos approach. In addition to this, we have the direct methods, which include the market surveys, input-output analysis, economic indicators, etc. If you would recollect that in our earlier introduction sections, number of discussions we have had, and we had discussed that there are number of approaches which management uses, and the methodology that management in the management we use as a subject. So, some of those we have also sort of repeated here for understanding the forecasting techniques. So, the quantitative models work well as long as little or no systematic change in the environment takes place. When patterns or relationships change, the quantitative approach based on the human judgment is more useful, and judgmental forecasting also takes into account the existing trends, but it can identify systematic change more quickly and interpret better the impact of such changes. So, we have to understand that if we have a combination of quantitative and qualitative, then perhaps we are in a better position to do forecasting. If you are using just a single method, it may not be that efficient, perhaps we can say. Forecasting may not be that much dependable, perhaps we can say that. So, the choice of a specific forecasting technique of course depends on various factors, and these factors of course you have to decide yourself, and some of these I am going to mention here, that what is the cost associated with the development of forecasting model compared to the potential gains that you are going to get out of this. Okay. In other words, what we can say, that benefits realized which we can outweigh the cost of implementation. So, if we are trying to make use of any technique, we have to understand that how much cost is involved in that. And otherwise we may use a technique, but that may become so expensive in terms of perhaps all resources, all types of resources, then it may not be advisable to use that particular technique. So, another issue that we have to take up here is that how complicated are the relationships, okay, that are being forecasted. See, in certain tangible sense, forecasting may become very easy, but if you are looking at the thing, in terms of other resources and where the gains are intangible, their forecasting sometimes becomes a little more complex, much greater a challenge perhaps. Now we have to see that how complicated are the relationships, as I said just now, and also we have to see whether we are looking at the forecasting in long term or short term. So in fact the whole forecasting strategy, as we are trying to understand, has to be designed very carefully, and then how much accuracy is required in that, because sometimes we may do with larger amount of error perhaps, but sometimes we need things to be very, very accurate. So that's the issue that I have discussed. Is there any minimum tolerance level of errors in forecasting? So from here we move to understand the next concept. So we have discussed quite a bit on the forecasting issue. I have devoted some more time on this because I thought forecasting becomes an extremely important concept for management. And so, so maybe a few concepts appear in which we aren't really discussing so much, but forecasting we have devoted some time. Now coming to the issue of industry structure, and in fact in our discussion on organizations, which is coming up just after 1 or 2 lectures, you will find once we will be discussing the industry structure once again, the types of organizations. So industry structure, when we say that relates to the concentration, economics of scale, product differentiation and barriers to entry are some of the important factors which determine the industry structure. We will be talking about industry structure, in fact the structure of organizations, types of organizations later in one of the lectures. Then we have the competitor analysis. Analyzing competitors is an integral part of strategic planning. In identifying their firm's current and the potential competitors, executives must consider several important variables, and some of these variables I have listed here: the scope of the field, customer orientation, commitment, identifying the milestone in the development of the strategy. And this brings us to the next concept, that is the business process re-engineering. We call it BPR. And these days you must be aware of the fact that we are looking at business process re-engineering as an important consideration. Excuse me. So, business process engineering, this involves the radical redesign of core business processes to achieve dramatic improvements in productivity, cycle times and quantity. In BPR, organizations start from the scratch and rethink the existing processes to deliver more value to the customer. That means we can rethink about the existing situation and we can re-engineer that to the best benefit that we might get in the times to come, because the world is changing. In fact, and that is going to be one of the discussions in our course on the change process. So, business process engineering is very much related to the issue of management of change, which we will be taking up later in this course. So, so in this context we have to understand that companies reduce organizational layers. They might, because if they believe that now, see, as we know that the organizations are becoming flatter. Earlier they were taller organizations. This is because of so many reasons which we will discuss later. So the companies sometimes may reduce organizational layers, they may eliminate unproductive activities into cross-functional teams, and these are some of the aspects using information technology to improve data dissemination and decision making process. So from here we also talk about the capacity expansion. In capacity expansion, we have talked about diversification earlier, and here we are talking about the capacity expansion of an organization. Obviously, the reference here is to the manufacturing organizations, largely we can say that, but management doesn't only is not only limited to that, but since many examples come from the industrial organizations, so some of these are related to that. So any major capacity expansion is a strategic decision again, and when firms add capacity, they may not be able to utilize their capacity fully. Sometimes it may so happen that you are not able to actually utilize your capacity, or sometimes you feel that whatever capacity we had, we would like to expand because of so many reasons, including the market demand, or your perhaps the own organization has become very very much perhaps developed. There may be a number of reasons for that. So not only adding capacity is risky, but sometimes the competitors may also do so, and the gain in a large market share. Okay. So the risk factor also we have to see that the risk associated with capacity expansion is largely due to uncertainty in this regard, and as we will see later that the capacity expansion has to be done, but we have to make that analysis all the time. So any major capacity expansion is a strategic decision, as we have seen earlier, and when the firms add capacity, they may not be able to utilize the capacity fully, and as we have talked about later. So the future demands are important, the future prices of inputs are important, technological advancements are important, and so many other factors like reactions of the competitors, and that is important. So we have to see that impact of industry capacity expansion. I mean, what kind of impact that we may find on this capacity expansion. So this becomes again a strategic decision for an organization. So this brings us to the issues of capacity expansion in terms of that how narrowly it is applied to the manufacturing of an organization. In many business manufacturing is trivial and non-existing capacity may be there. So how are we actually applying capacity expansion? That becomes very important. Capacity expansion is also narrowly applied to manufacturing and many other businesses. So activity needs to be understood in terms of investments made in most of the critical areas of value chain. So what we are trying to understand is that the capacity extension is actually the activity of the whole organizational planning. Thus, in the pharmaceutical industry, for example, if we are taking just one example, the capacity has to be defined in terms of a scientific manpower or sales force, or in a software company, perhaps software development company, we have the capacity that has to be understood in terms of a number of programmers employed. So every organization perhaps will need different types of analysis for capacity expansion. Industry overcapacity is one of the important risks. in which the companies have to consider while expanding their individual capacities. See what happens if you have over perhaps employment, then there's a possibility of dysfunctional energy. So sometimes if you have too much capacity in machines may remain idle. So we have to actually calculate all these. So neither the manpower nor the machine capacity, not the other capacities perhaps, we have to really optimize on those if we have to really make good management strategies. As we have seen that industry's overcapacity could also become a risk, and the risk of excess capacity is particularly high in commodity types, types of business. In such industries, since the products are not differentiated and firms tend to add capacity to generate the economies of scale, sometimes we may not be calculating it very efficiently. So the capacity expansion sometimes may not be as efficient as expected perhaps. So there is a high capacity risk also in this. So how do we really strategically calculate that? That's very important. Now these risks are also high when the capacity cannot be increased in the incremental amounts, okay, but only in big lumps. So that all depends on the kind of technology that you have, the kind of business that you have. And overcapacity may also happen in some industries. As I just now discussed, the number of issues about overcapacity. Now, this may be characterized by the significant learning curve advantages, or as long as the lead time is adding to the capacity, because the excess capacity might usually result into some difficulties, as I was just now talking to you about. And when there are many players, perhaps we can say that the market leaders, then the firms will actually continue to expand, okay, indiscriminately, but then there may be problems sometimes. So the capacity expansion, that's a very interesting and important perhaps concept in management, but we have to see how much of capacity expansion has to be done. See, all these concepts, let me repeat it here once again, that all these concepts I am trying to just familiarize you with these concepts, because when we are taking up each topic, then once again these concepts might appear there. There we may just give you this idea and then we move on. So if you understand these some of these concepts, then for you it's going to be better in terms of understanding management studies. This brings us to the next concept, the codetermination. This is a concept, maybe some of you, for some of you, this is a very new term. Codetermination, that's a part of participative management. In fact, we are going to have one lecture or maybe more than one, maybe two lectures on participative management all over the globe. And codetermination is a type of participative management. This is a type, and this is a kind of management system that requires the cooperation of the representatives of laborers, employees and trade unions on the board. And this system is prevalent in the European countries like Germany and Netherlands. In fact, most of the East European countries, we have talked about the codetermination as one of the techniques. These countries have a dual management system consisting of two boards, namely the management board and the supervisory board. The management board has the executive responsibility. For example, the management board in Germany, for example, that the one example that I have decided to discuss here. Suppose that has 11 members and the supervisory board that has 20 members, of which the members, the employees are the representatives. And these representatives actually decide the affairs of the company. And in fact, they have the decision making power, just like the perhaps we have in our country, almost very close to the decision making, top decision making bodies that we have. And the major objectives of codetermination is to protect the interest of workers in the firms. However, there are downsides as well. Interference in the labor unions, this may slow down the decision making process. But that then as that happens in the whole participative management situation, it may sometimes slow down the process, but at the end of it perhaps it is always advisable to use that, because that gives greater satisfaction and greater ease at the place of work. So I have decided to discuss about say 2 hours, two lectures I have decided to give you on participative management as well, which will come during the course of this this particular course. So from here we move on to another concept. Am I going very fast? Is it? Am I going very fast? Is it? Any questions you would like to ask me about any of these concepts? Yes, please ask me some questions. Okay. So, we move on to the next concept now, the core competencies. A core competence is a company's specialized capability which is largely embodied in the collective knowledge of its people and the organizational procedures which hope the way the employees interact. So, this brings us, so do you understand the core competencies? See, each one of us may also have some core competency, and every organization has some core competency that they have. We will be talking about it also in details when we are looking at some of the other chapters later. Okay. Then the next point I would like to discuss is the issue of ethics. We all know that no successful organization can really be seen without the organizational good values and ethics. And here I am trying to just, even though this is going to be another lecture for us, we are going to discuss this in much greater details. So, here we are looking at the corporate code of ethics. As corporate conduct comes under increased scrutiny for both shareholders and regulators, there is pressure to create exemplary codes of conduct which promote good conduct by setting a common standard by acceptable behavior. Corporate code of ethics defines the company's core values and the guiding principles. So, when a company is working, we need to understand what is the core, what are the core values and what is the code of ethics. And in fact, some codes are very common, okay, perhaps across most of the organizations, and some may be specific to certain organizations. When we are discussing the values and ethics in organizations, we will come to these issues. Then the governance, the issue of corporate governance becomes extremely important. Corporate governance has been a very hot issue in these years, in the years of 2000s. I think there is a slight error here. Okay, it does not matter. The series of corporate standards involving environment or the other issues, this has become an extremely important factor in the governance of an organization. And when we are looking at the governance, we are looking at the environment, we are looking at so many other issues which might bring results for us. So the corporate governance is the subject that deals with interaction of managers, directors and shareholders, and we are talking about directors are expected to safeguard the interests of the shareholders by monitoring the actions of managers, and on the other hand the managers also have to show their responsibility in the overall corporate governance. Here see, in between when I am explaining a particular concept more than perhaps some others, I have taken some examples to make you understand. In the United Kingdom, the importance of good corporate governance, this was brought about by the public attention after a series of corporate collapses and the scandals in the 1980s and 1990s. The effectiveness of the board of directors, this was highlighted following the publication of the Cadbury Committee report in 1992, and the code of best practices was established. So, although it is voluntary, all the listed companies are expected to actually comply with it, and since the Cadbury report, a number of other committees have established the best practices in the specific areas, like it could be many, like directors' pay, or it could be many other issues. So, all these issues are taken into consideration. Now, very close to the issue of ethics that we were talking about is another term that we use in the management studies, is the corporate social responsibility. This is how much the corporate social responsibility an organization has, and in fact, in today's time when we are looking at particularly with the globalization, we are looking at that every corporation must also abide by its social responsibility. So, today there is a pressure on the companies to go beyond profits. See, earlier we were talking about, and in fact also when we were talking about an introduction, we had put profits as one of the important parameters, at least for the industries. But then today even the industries have to go beyond the issue of profit towards safeguarding the interests of various stakeholders, both inside and outside the organization. So, the insiders are typically the stockholders and the employees of the firm, and the outsiders are the other individuals or the groups affected by the actions of those firms. So, when we are looking at the issue of corporate social responsibility, that means this is rather away from the exact main manufacturing process, how the organization is looking at its corporate social responsibility, that's the issue here. So, each firm regardless of its size must decide how to discharge its perceived social responsibility, and there are number of issues, there are number of approaches, and different approaches are adopted by different organizations, and different approaches adopted by different firms, they reflect the differences in their competitive positions in industries and country environment, and the ecological and perhaps the pressures that they might have. Today, as you know, most of the people are aware of this fact that any industry that is doing very good business also has social responsibility in terms of not depleting their ecological environmental scenario. And this is one of the again the issues of management, which may look like as if it's away from the boundaries of your organization, but then you are part of a society. And so as a management expert, perhaps you can't say that I will close my eyes to the corporate social responsibility. That cannot be done. And so this is becoming a great the issue of importance, in fact a movement. In other words, they will reflect both situational factors and differing priorities and the acknowledgements of the claims that others might have. So, the corporate social responsibility becomes an important factor. Again, in our lectures, we have one lecture on the corporate social responsibility. Then we come to the critical success factor. Critical success factor refers to those few critical areas where things must go right for the business to flourish. When we are talking about industries at this point, that if an industry has to flourish, it has to go beyond a particular success factor. For example, the ability to control freight costs is critical success factor for perhaps a computer software company, we can say, or similarly we can say the ability to design freight costs is a critical success factor for manufacturer of steel. So there are many such examples, just a couple of examples which I am discussing here. So, but that is an important factor in the overall process of managing. This brings us to yet another concept, that is culture. Short while ago we were talking about that management studies is a multidisciplinary concept, and that has lot to do with the social factors and also lot to do with overall cultural factors. So, the culture refers to the knowledge that people use to interpret the experience and the beliefs and values of employees, which form the core of the organizational culture. If we are suppose borrowing some technology, we are doing some collaboration, so the culture becomes important factor there. If we have the different kind of a culture, something we are borrowing from another country, then we have to see that the performer who is from this country, is he able to adapt to some of the requirements of the organization. So, culture refers to the knowledge that people use to interpret this experience, that is what we have talked about, and this makes the organizational culture. And this issue has been studied by Hofstede, one of the management thinkers who has worked in the in many areas, including his work is well known in the area of psychology, value related. Okay, so he has talked about the cultural values, the social values all over the world, and he is a famous Dutch scholar, and he has talked about values in terms of the 4 well-known dimensions of culture, which is said that their culture is characterized by the power distance, uncertainty avoidance, individualism and masculinity. And he has done a lot of work in this area, which again will form part of our discussion in one of the lectures which we may have. From here, from the issue of culture, we move to customer relationship management. Some of us believe that okay, we have manufactured a product and that is the perhaps the best product and that is the end of it, but actually not. Just like the corporate social responsibility, we have to go actually beyond the boundary of our organization. We have manufactured, but we have to do the marketing, and unless we have good marketing strategies, we perhaps may not be that much successful. So, the customer relationship management, which we can briefly say CRM, is a process which companies use to understand their customer and manage them with most profitable way. Okay, we can design a system where we can actually manage them within that most profitable way, and CRM may increase profits by improving customer retention, offering programs and better customer related service. And see, if you have a good customer, you should try to retain them rather than becoming very indifferent to them. Okay. So, that has become an important aspect of managing. So, here we are coming to the another aspect, that is the double loop learning. I am presenting a scenario. So, I am trying to acquaint you with some kind of a panorama of the concepts of management. So, some concepts I have tried to pick up from the production management, some from the human resource management, some from marketing management, and some from strategic management and so on. And I have tried to put them in some kind of alphabetical order, but not necessarily that all the concepts are here in the alphabetical order. So let us see now the next concept that is coming up for you is the double loop learning. Double loop learning is a process in which learning is perceived as a continuous loop where the learner gives the feedback to the learning process and corrective actions are taken to modify the system in order to make it more effective. In fact, this concept becomes extremely important when we are looking at the issue of HRD, and when we are trying to make corrections, we are trying to give feedback or trying to actually trying to give training. We are dealing with the issue of training and development. Okay, so these factors become important there. Now, with the advent of the new ideas and the new companies working and new competitions coming up with globalization, another issue that comes up as a strategic issue for us is the issue of downsizing. Many companies are downsizing because of many reasons. It could be also the kind of technology that you are using now. So, perhaps you can downsize. So, in the face of slowing or decline, of course, is one of the factors, but technology could also be another factor. So, in the face of slowing or declining sales, the companies often reduce their employee base to cut the costs, and downsizing is a common phenomenon in many organizations, but I am adding that In addition to this, sometimes because of new technology we do not need so many people, there is a new system, so we do not need so many people. Even at that time we have to go in for some kind of a downsizing, that I am adding from what I have just caption I have just shown you here. So, just that idea I had not shown there. So, the economic value that has to be added for most of the things when we are looking at a tangible gain. And here what we are trying to look at, that the economic value added, which we may call as EVA, this measures the value creation to shareholders by a company or business unit. The analysis measures the ability of a company or business unit to earn more than its total cost of capital. This, from here we move on to talk about the concept of emotional intelligence. Some of you might think that the concept of emotional intelligence is important. Let us see what is the meaning of emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is about moving people in the desired direction, and there are number of components of emotional intelligence, which is self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy and social skill. So, we will discuss about the other issues in our next lecture, and we will begin with the environmental scanning.